Chapter 2, The Origins of Public Speaking. So in this lecture video, these notes we're going to review talks about the origins of public speaking, and it gets to the point which a lot of you are probably thinking about now, which is, why on earth do I have to take this class? So it kind of builds to the history of rhetoric and public speaking, and it leads to why it has become an important course in the foundation of a lot of our academic majors today in the university setting. So why do we have to take this class? The Greeks were the first to systemize the art of public speaking, which they called rhetoric. And as defined by Aristotle, rhetoric is the faculty of discovering in the particular case all the available means of persuasion. So rhetoric is basically taking all the tools you have in your toolbox when it comes to communicating with others and using those tools to persuade people to believe what you believe, to follow your thoughts, and to kind of get them to maybe change their point of view or reinforce their point of view. So we're going to look at the evolution of rhetoric in ancient Greece. We're going to go kind of quickly through some of this, but when you're reading your text, you can see how this has kind of evolved through the years. So in the Homeric period between 850 BC to 650 BC, the evolution in forms of government, monarchy to oligarchy, and tyranny to eventual democracy began in ancient Greece. So you can see during this period why it was important for people to be effective communicators, because we began democracy. Democracy was something that was begun, and we know that a democratic society, the key to that, the foundation of that, is the voice of the people, is that the government is structured around the desires, the voice of the people. So in order to be able to do that, the people have to have an educated voice, a clear voice, an effective voice to get government to move in the direction that they want it to. So in 621 BC, the citizens of Athens commissioned Draco, an elder citizen considered to be the wisest of all the Greeks, to sort their laws into an organized system known as codification. So prior to that, laws were an oral form of custom and tradition. So basically, their laws were passed on orally. And you think of stories through families, you think of a lot of cultures that really revolve around an oral tradition. So at this point, the Greeks' legal system, their laws were only communicated orally. And so at this point, it became a codification system, which was organized and went a little bit more advanced. Draco's laws were reformed by Solon, who introduced the first form of popular democracy in Athens. So as we move on, we'll look kind of how it's evolved in ancient Greece. We have Pericles. This was pure democracy, began liberalized judicial system. We had juries where poor citizens could serve. So we kind of begin to have a system, a government system that wasn't just run by the elite in the society, but everyone was beginning to have a voice. We have the establishment of legislative assembly. So you think of a legislative assembly, think of a legislative session we have now, and how important communication is during that process to ensure that you are advocating for what you believe in and you're doing it in an effective way that can bring other people to your side. So Athens became the crossroads of the world. It was the center of Western civilization, and this brought about the need for public speaking. So democracy established the need for training in public speaking. So Pericles' juries numbered between 500 to 2,000 people. Wowza is what I have to say to that. I mean, I've had jury duty before, and it can be a little bit of an ordeal with maybe 50 people being called in just for jury duty. So I can't imagine a jury of 500 to 2,000 people. That would be super special to be involved in. So when you think about this, think about a trial. So think if you're an attorney and you're an attorney in a jury trial, and your jury is composed of 500 to 2,000 people. So I'm picturing like a Coliseum type setting, where attorneys were talking to a ton of people. So this truly became the setting for public speeches, were the trials. And trials were really big events. They didn't have court TV. That's why they had 2,000 people there to serve as jurors. So everyone could be a part of that process. So rhetoric and oratory was a part of Greek and Roman education. At age 14, Only boys were sent to the school of rhetorician for theoretical instruction in public speaking. So public speaking was basic to the educational system by Socrates and Aristotle. But look at that. At age of 14, only boys. And we can all surmise from that it was only white boys. And I would say we could even go further to that it was only your more affluent families that had the basic education. So it was something that began in the educational system, but that wasn't distributed equally. So if we go on, this is where the idea of dialectics and logic came about. They were used to determine reasoning in ancient Greece. So we have Zeno of Elea is considered to be the inventor of dialectic reasoning. So dialectic is a debate intended to resolve conflict between two contradictory or apparently contradictory ideas or elements, and you're supposed to do it logically and establishing truths on both sides rather than disproving an argument. So if you read a lot about philosophers, they had differing viewpoints on a lot of things, but some commonality that you find among philosophers is that they do believe that I don't hold the truth and you don't hold the truth. But in our process of discourse, in our process of discussion, in our process of discussing what I believe, what you believe, in the middle, we find truth. So the idea that you're not necessarily debating sides to disagree with each other or to conflict or to prove each other wrong, but that we debate and we have discussions and we have discourse because that's where we find the truth, is right there in the middle. So sophists were primarily a teacher of political excellence who dealt with practical and immediate issues of the day, whose investigations led in many instances to philosophical relativism. So relativism, roughly put, is the view that truth and falsity, right and wrong, standards of reasoning and procedures of justification are products of differing conventions and frameworks of assessment, and that their authority is confined to the context giving rise to them. So basically, when we have these debates and discussions and you're talking with someone and you're going back and forth, that you discuss what's right and wrong, what's true, what's false, but that's within the context of that discussion that you have. That doesn't necessarily apply as global truths. So Aristotle, I think that's a philosopher that most of us have heard of, even if we're not really into philosophers. Aristotle's a pretty popular one, and he wrote that the rhetorical approach is the faculty of discovering, in this particular case, all the available means of persuasion. So he cited 4 sources of rhetoric. Number 1, by its truth and justice maintain their natural superiority. It is suited to popular audiences since they cannot follow scientific demonstration. So rhetoric are using word rather than maybe taking it deeper on a scientific way. It teaches us to see both sides of an issue and to refute unfair arguments, and is a means of self-defense. So Aristotle, the mastery of the art, calls for 3 types of proofs: logical proof, ethical proof, and pathetic proof. So logical proof are facts and statistics. When you're persuading someone, think about what do I need to do to get varying people to see my point of view. And Aristotle said you have to do 3 different things. And you have to consider this, that not everyone sees things the same way. Not everyone views things the same way. You have some people that are grounded in fact. So if you're trying to convince some people of something, you need numbers, you need facts, you need statistics, you need studies, you need expert testimony. That's your logos, that's your logical reasoning. And then he says, but also they have to trust you as a speaker. You're not going to persuade me of anything if I don't believe in your character. So ethos is the credibility of the speaker. It's the knowledge of the character of the speaker. And then we have some people that are really drawn in by emotion. So for some of us, when you tell us numbers and you tell us facts and statistics, gives me a headache. I don't deal with that very well. But if you tell an emotional story, if you tell a personal experience, if you tell an anecdote, that emotion can pull me in. So whenever you're persuading an audience, you have to consider that you have all of these types of people in your audience, and you have people that are a combination. You have some that need a little logic and they need a little emotion. You have some that if they trust you and they think you're a person of character, they're going to believe whatever you tell them. You have some that are really pulled in by emotion. So that's what Aristotle felt it took to be a master of persuasion in rhetoric. Now we move on to Cicero. I think this is another name that we've heard through the years, whether we know a lot about his work, but his life coincides with the decline and fall of the Roman Republic. He's considered to be the greatest of the Roman orators. He was a lawyer, a politician, and a philosopher. He believed that the orator must have a firm foundation in general knowledge, and they should be able to speak wisely and eloquently on any subject with a dignified, restrained delivery. So you think about sometimes what we see in our legislative offices, or really if you're watching like the BBC and you're watching their legislative sessions, that gets a little crazy. But they're thinking, his idea is, in order to be an effective communicator, we have to be dignified. We have to handle ourselves well. We have to deliver our information with restraint. So that's even when someone's really challenging our opinions and we're really passionate about it, we still have to approach it in a dignified and restrained manner. He considered oratory to be the highest form of intellectual activity and an instrument indispensable for the welfare of the state. So in order for our governments to continue to grow, in order for progress to happen, we had to have oratory to be the key of that, the very center of that. The welfare of everything is that people are able to effectively communicate their beliefs, and that it's the highest form of intellectual activity. Then we have Quintilinus, which I can tell you I did look that pronunciation up and I forgot it in 11 minutes of this video. He's a celebrated orator and rhetorician. He's a Latin teacher and a writer. Rhetoric was primarily composed of three aspects during this time: the theoretical, the educational, and the practical. And he believed that deviating from natural language and the natural order of thought in pursuit of an over-elaborate style created confusion in both the orator and the audience. So some speakers are much more charismatic and much more dramatic than others. So he would say, you keep it simple, you stay professional, and don't go over the top, and that presents a much better message. He organized the practice of oratory into 5 canons: the discovery of arguments, the arrangement of arguments, the expression of style, memorization, and your delivery. So he thought those were the most important 5 canons with oratory. So then we move on to the Middle Ages. It's considered to be St. Augustine's considered to be the only major thinker or rhetoric associated with the Middle Ages. After his conversion to Christianity, rhetoric became aligned with preaching and letter writing and education. Along with logic and grammar, rhetoric is considered part of the trivium of learning. So think of the 3 R's we have now: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Rhetoric was used in order to spread Christianity and prevailed in the Christian church to guide preachers. And then we have humanism in the Renaissance. Interest in the human word as constructed through language rather than the natural world. They focused on the human epistemology of the world, of the words that you're saying. They emphasized the word of human culture and language. The power of the word, not only because it gave those with a command of it special advantage in daily interaction, but because of its inherent capacity to disclose to the world of humans. So it gave power to those that were able to use it. Then we have, in rationalism during the Renaissance, we have Ramos and Descartes. Both sought objective. They both sought scientific truths that would exist for all time. Rationalists had little patience for rhetoric, and they really focused on science and truth, so less on the art of it. Ramos felt that rhetoric was only style and delivery without substance, and Descartes believed that in order to reach certain knowledge, the foundations of thought provided by others had to be abandoned. So he rejected truths established in speech or in the course of social and political action. So if you see how it's evolved, you see how it's evolved from the very beginning, that it was an art form. It was an art form, and those that did it well and those that did it beautifully were considered at the highest level of intellectual ability. And so now it's becoming much more practical, that the use of rhetoric, the art form, is taken away, that we only use our words to discuss scientific facts, and the scientific facts leads to truth, but they no longer believe that you and I and our discourse finds the truth. They felt that science provided the truth. Then we have the modern period, and it's kind of evolves during this period. We have the study of the origin of words, and we kind of see how words evolved, and as words evolved, the meaning evolved. We have the classical approaches in terms of modern developments of psychology and how rhetoric and communication played a part to that. We look at the psychological processes of how it looked at human nature. Then we look at how rhetoric was kind of moved into print. It kind of evolved into beautiful letters and the aesthetic of writing than any informative value it had. So we kind of take the rhetoric and the art form, and that you need to be an eloquent and beautiful speaker, and that kind of transitioned to communicating through letters, and that's a beautiful art form. And then we go to the elocutionary movement, which this is back to delivery. So at the height in the mid-18th century, the focus came back to delivery and focused on the voice and the entire person and the facial expressions and the posture and the gestures and the movement. And this all led to the college curriculum development. That is not that far from what we see today. So this is a brief history of rhetoric. I hope this gives you some information of sort of how it evolves. There's some of these key terms that we're going to look at much more deeply as we continue through the semester. We're going to look at especially Aristotle's 3 types of proof. That comes up several times when we talk about persuasion and we talk about research in your speech. But I think this kind of leads you to why we take this course. And I want you to think about our society in recent year or two, and the importance of rhetoric and participating in discourse in our society in an effective way. I think we've all seen instances where there are people that are passionate on a topic, but their passion overruns their wisdom, their ability to communicate their wisdom. And so maybe their point of view is not received as effectively as it should have been. We know people that have a lot of great thoughts and they have a lot of great wisdom about topics, but they don't have the means to communicate them effectively. And then we see that those people that use their words beautifully in a way to advocate for the things that they feel is right or they feel is wrong, and they do that in a public setting to move society forward, to move society in a direction where it needs to go and where they're passionate for it to go. So I hope that you see that there's so many parts of your lives where studying public speaking can play a part, but the history of it is so that we are active citizens within a democratic society, that we're able to use our words to push things forward within the democratic system.